I remember the exact moment when everything changed, when the world seemed to collapse around me, but somehow in the wreckage, something beautiful emerged. It wasn't a slow burn, no. It was an explosion, sudden and violent. One second I was sitting in my office, the air heavy with the usual hum of fluorescent lights and papers shuffling, and then, without warning, my phone buzzed. A message. "I know what you are." My heart stopped, then raced, then stopped again. The words on the screen felt like they were carved into my skin. My pulse drummed in my ears. The message was from someone I didn't know, someone who knew too much. No introduction, no pleasantries, just those four words. It didn't make sense. How could anyone know? I had kept my secret, my truth, buried deep within me for so long, hidden in places only I dared to touch. The world was still so raw when it came to things like this. I had built walls, iron walls around my heart, telling myself it was better this way, safer this way. But now it felt like the universe was calling my bluff. I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. What did it mean? Who was this person? My stomach turned into knots and my hands trembled as I typed back a simple "Who is this?" The reply came just as quickly. Someone who knows how hard it is to keep pretending. That was it. No more. It was as if I had been thrust into the unknown, a darkened place where I didn't know whether I should fight or flee. The words felt like they were drenched in some kind of secret, something shared between us that I hadn't yet begun to understand. My head swam. This person, they couldn't possibly know, right? But then I realized in the pit of my stomach the undeniable truth. They did. They saw the real me. And that's when it hit me. This was no coincidence. There was something so deliberate, so pointed about the way they had reached out. I had spent years carefully crafting my life, keeping every detail in perfect order, controlling what I could, hiding what I couldn't. Yet somehow this stranger knew more than anyone should. My palms grew clammy as the possibility settled in. I was being watched. That was the only answer that made sense. But by who? And for what purpose? I stared at my phone, paralyzed, the weight of it all sinking deeper into my chest. And then the next message came. "I can help you. I know you're scared, but you don't have to do this alone." And just like that, the world shifted again. There it was, an offer, a lifeline thrown to me like a rope in a storm. But there was something in those words that made me hesitate. Was this really someone offering support, or was this a trap? Who would reach out to someone like me, someone with so much to hide, so much to lose? And yet I found myself drawn in. Maybe it was the desperation in the message, or maybe it was the sheer weight of everything I had been hiding for so long. Either way, something in me stirred, a hope I hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was the moment that changed everything. But what would it cost? I had no idea. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. My mind was racing, filled with 100 thoughts, each one more impossible than the last. I had always prided myself on my control, my ability to keep my life tightly wound, to keep my truth buried beneath layers of silence and restraint. But now, all of that control was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. Was I really ready to let someone into my world, into the darkest corners of myself? Was I even ready to acknowledge what I had kept hidden for so long? The person on the other end of the phone was relentless. Every few minutes, another message would appear, each one more personal than the last. "I see you. I feel what you feel." It was like they were peeling away the walls I had built, one word at a time, and with every message it felt like a thread was unraveling, loosening something deep inside me that I had kept so tightly wound. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to scream at them to leave me alone, to retreat back into my cocoon of solitude and safety. But I couldn't. There was something about their words, something raw and real, that made me pause. Something made me wonder if, for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone in this. Then, late one night, when I was half drowning in self-doubt, I finally caved. I typed out a response. "Who are you?" The message was short, blunt, but the truth was I needed to know. I needed to understand who this person was, why they had come into my life so unexpectedly. A few moments passed before the reply came, but when it did, it was nothing like I had expected. "I'm someone who understands the weight of living a lie." And there it was, the truth in its most unfiltered form. I wasn't the only one. This person, whoever they were, had been hiding something too. Something that, like mine, had cost them pieces of themselves. I couldn't help but feel a pang of recognition. I wasn't alone in this after all. But that recognition came with a wave of uncertainty. This wasn't some random stranger. This was someone who knew exactly what it felt like to carry the burden of living in the shadows, to keep a part of yourself buried and locked away. It was both a relief and a danger. I had been running from my truth for so long, keeping it hidden from the world, but now it seemed like that secret wasn't just mine anymore. Whoever this person was, they had the power to change everything. And that's when they made their next move. "Meet me. Tomorrow night, the old bookstore on Maple Street. We'll talk. We'll figure this out together." I stared at the message, the words hanging in the air like a dare. It felt like everything I had ever feared was coming to a head. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like the only way out. It was a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But somehow, I knew it was already too late. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, caught between fear and something that felt strangely like hope. I didn't sleep that night. The hours stretched on like an endless blur, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words flashing in my mind. "Meet me. Tomorrow night." The old bookstore on Maple Street. I had walked by that place 1,000 times, its windows dusty and forgotten, tucked away in the corner of town like an afterthought. I knew it was a place that time had left behind, a relic of another era. It was a fitting location, I thought. It felt like the kind of place where secrets were born, where the world could fade away and nothing but the truth could remain. But what was I about to uncover? What truth would I find there that I hadn't already buried so deep within myself? As the night dragged on, I found myself pacing in my apartment, caught between conflicting emotions. Fear tangled with curiosity. Anger festered beneath the surface, and guilt gnawed at my conscience. But beneath all of that was something else, a strange, aching pull, a sense that this moment, this encounter, was somehow inevitable. I couldn't ignore it. I had spent so long convincing myself that my life was one of isolation, that I was better off alone, but now it felt like someone was offering me the chance to break free from that, to step into something unknown, something raw. But was it worth it? Would it break me open, or would it finally set me free? I tried to picture the person behind the messages, but every time I did, the image slipped away like sand through my fingers. Who were they? What did they look like? There were no details, no names, just words, but those words felt like they were etched into my soul. As I thought about the possibility of meeting them, a surge of panic gripped me. I wanted to back out, to block them, and pretend none of this ever happened. But that's not what happened. Instead, I found myself dressing in the dead of night, grabbing my jacket and walking out the door as if something deep inside me knew that I couldn't turn back anymore. I didn't even know why I was doing it. It was insane. I didn't even know who I was walking toward, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would change everything. The walk to Maple Street felt like a dream, my feet moving on their own as I walked through the empty streets, the quiet echo of my steps on the pavement creating an eerie sense of anticipation. The city felt still, asleep in its own indifference, and I felt as though I were walking into some parallel world. As I turned the corner, the old bookstore came into view, its silhouette dark against the starless sky. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest before stepping up to the door. It creaked open when I pushed it, the sound like a warning, like a door to another realm slowly being unlocked. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old pages, the kind of smell that made your heart ache with forgotten memories. And there, standing in the dim light, was a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, their back to me. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't what I expected. This wasn't what I had imagined. But the moment they turned around, everything changed. The face staring back at me was familiar, too familiar. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be, but there he was, Ethan. The one person I had never, ever expected to see. The person I had once known, once trusted, and once loved back when everything in my life seemed so simple, back when I didn't have to hide. But there he was, standing in front of me, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't some anonymous person offering me a way out. This was him, Ethan. The very person I had spent years avoiding, the one I had buried deep in the recesses of my mind, a person who had once meant everything to me. A person who had once loved me back. And now, as he stood there waiting for me to step into this new world, I realized the terrifying truth. This was no coincidence. This was no chance encounter. This was fate, and it was pushing us back together, whether we were ready or not. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear the faint rustle of the pages in the dusty old bookstore. Ethan's face was different, older, and yet unmistakably him. The same eyes that had once gazed at me with a mixture of longing and tenderness, now filled with something darker, more complicated. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to scream at him, but I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He looked the same, yet he wasn't the same. Neither of us were. We had both changed in ways I hadn't anticipated, in ways I couldn't quite understand. And then he spoke. His voice was quieter than I remembered, but the warmth was still there. "I knew you'd come," he said, almost like a whisper, the words hanging between us like a confession. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. "You were the one person I thought I could trust," I said before I even realized the words had left my mouth. My voice cracked, and I quickly turned my face away, as if the act of breaking down would somehow erase the vulnerability I had just exposed. I hadn't expected to feel that much, when I saw him again. I had tried to bury him, to lock away the part of me that loved him, but now, standing there in front of him, it was impossible to ignore. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes softening. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Protecting me from what? I opened my mouth to argue, to shout at him, to demand answers, but his hand reached out and touched mine, gently, almost tenderly. The warmth of his skin sent a shockwave through me, and for a brief, fleeting second, it was like we were back in time, before the secrets, before the pain, before the distance had grown between us. But then everything came crashing down again as the full weight of what he was saying sunk in. "I've been trying to find you," he continued, his eyes desperate now, as if I were the last piece of something he couldn't live without. "I couldn't forget you, no matter how hard I tried. The truth is, I never stopped loving you. He stopped, swallowing hard like the words were too much to bear. The room seemed to tilt around me, my vision blurring. I wanted to pull away, to push him out of my life for good, to walk away from this twisted nightmare of emotions. But I couldn't. I couldn't because there was a part of me, the part that I thought I had buried so deep, that still wanted him, still longed for him in ways I couldn't explain. How could this be happening? How could we be here like this, after everything? After all the years of running from this, of pretending we were strangers, pretending that what we had was nothing more than a faded memory. I took a step back, but Ethan followed. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible now. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I need you to know the truth. The whole truth. I couldn't stay away anymore. I couldn't pretend anymore." His words hung in the air, suffocating me with their weight, and I felt myself crumbling under the pressure. But I still didn't understand. Why now? Why this? Why me? Before I could even form the question, he continued, his eyes now filled with raw desperation. "I was the one who sent those messages. I was the one who reached out to you. Not because I wanted to drag you back into a past we couldn't change, but because I wanted to give us both a chance to move forward, to be who we truly are." My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about us reconnecting. It was about something much bigger, something much more dangerous. And yet I felt that familiar spark of hope flicker deep within me, the hope that maybe, just maybe, this time we could get it right. But as Ethan stepped closer, his hands trembling as they reached for mine, I couldn't help but wonder if we were both about to make the biggest mistake of our lives. Everything in me screamed to run, to turn around and walk out the door, to slam it behind me and never look back. But the truth, that long-buried truth, was clawing its way to the surface. I had spent years pretending I had forgotten about Ethan, pretending I was content with my solitary life, that I was fine with the walls I'd built around my heart. But now, as I stood there with him, I knew those walls had never been real. They had only been a way to protect myself from the one thing I feared the most, this. The possibility of loving someone I couldn't have, someone I couldn't control, someone who had shattered me in ways I still didn't fully understand. And yet, as I looked at him, standing there with his eyes wide open and his heart on his sleeve, I realized I hadn't just been running from him. I had been running from myself. I swallowed hard, the words stuck in my throat. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, my voice strained, barely audible. The bitterness in my own question surprised me. There was so much I didn't understand, so many layers of lies and omissions between us. How had we come to this point? How had we been so close, only for it to all fall apart? How had we both let something so powerful slip away so easily? Ethan's face softened, and I saw the guilt flash across his features. "I didn't want to drag you into a mess I created," he admitted quietly. "I thought if I kept my distance, if I kept quiet, you'd have a better chance at moving on. But I was wrong. I should have been honest with you. I should have fought for us." His words, raw and unfiltered, stirred something inside of me, something I wasn't ready to feel. "I didn't want to hurt you either," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But I see now that by pretending nothing ever happened, by walking away, I hurt you more than I could ever imagine." The heaviness of those words landed like a final nail in a coffin I hadn't realized was still open. I could see it, the regret in his eyes, the regret that mirrored my own. It was the weight of years spent apart, of silent longing, of everything we had both buried under the false pretenses of moving on. There was no easy way out of this, no simple solution to undo the damage we had caused. I knew this. And yet, as I stood there, holding his hands for the first time in years, something inside me told me that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. Maybe we could finally stop pretending. But then the air shifted. A sound broke through the tension between us, a loud crash, a rustling followed by hurried footsteps. My heart skipped in my chest. I turned toward the sound only to see a shadow dart across the room, fast and unseen. A cold chill ran through my spine. My eyes locked with Ethan's, and in that moment, we both understood. This wasn't just about us anymore. We weren't the only ones with secrets. We weren't the only ones fighting for something we didn't even know how to name. Before either of us could react, the door swung open again and a figure stepped inside. Someone neither of us expected. Someone who had been in the shadows all along, watching, waiting. Someone who knew our story better than we did. The room seemed to close in around me, and in that instant I realized the truth. What had begun as a secret romance, something private and sacred, was now part of something much larger, something far more dangerous than either of us could have ever imagined. And as I looked from Ethan to the stranger standing in the doorway, the only thought that ran through my mind was, we're not just fighting for love anymore. We're fighting for our lives.